Hello, my name is Paula J. Caplan, and I want to tell you why I started the Welcome Johnny and Jane Home project. My late father fought in the Battle of the Bulge. He was captain of an all-black artillery battery during World War II, and I loved him dearly. But there was a part of him that I never really knew much about, and that was what happened with him in the military and then in the war. And as I realized that, I started listening to other veterans from all eras, whether they were combat veterans or non-combat veterans, because I also realized in this country, most of us are not only war illiterate, but we're military illiterate. And I don't think that's healthy. Whatever your politics, whatever the veterans' politics, it's not good for this country if there are chasms between one group and another. And so I started listening to veterans about 14 years ago. And let me tell you one example of something that happened that led me to want to create this project and these listening sessions all over. I sat in a Starbucks and I was listening to a Vietnam veteran talk about what his experiences had been. And I didn't ask any questions. I didn't say anything. When there was a military term that he used, I didn't ask him what it meant because I felt that what he needed to say and what he wanted to say was more important than if I understood every single detail perfectly. So I just let him talk. Sometimes I was tempted to give him a compliment, and then I thought, wait a minute, I don't know what this would mean to him, and most of all, I didn't want to interrupt him. I wanted to just clear the way for him to say whatever he wanted to say. He spoke for almost 3 hours, and then he said he was ready to stop. The next day, I got an email from him in which he said, "Last night, I slept for the first time since I got back from Vietnam." And I kept having experiences like that, and that's why I started the project. We've had combat veterans, we've had non-combat veterans, we've had women, we've had men, we've had people of all ages come and speak during listening sessions. And uniformly, they have said that it was helpful to them. I'm very careful not to promise more than I know a listening session can deliver. What I can tell you is this, that the most powerful kinds of things that veterans have said afterward have gone all the way up to the one who said to me that when he came back from Vietnam, this was a different one, a different veteran. When he came back from Vietnam, he dealt with his trauma by listening to other veterans. And he said when he heard about our project, he said, "Now I'm ready for someone to listen to me." And I paired him with a listener in his area, and she listened, and they both sent me notes saying, "Thank you very much for doing this." And that was all I knew. Then I ran into him about 8 months later, and he took me aside and he said, "I want to tell you something. Before I had the listening session, I had been thinking constantly of killing myself. And since the listening session, I haven't thought once about suicide." Even if the results are less extreme and less powerful than that, we still hear the most wonderful stories about the ways that just having somebody listen can be helpful. And I want to tell you one other thing. We ask the listeners, "How was it for you?" And this is a typical kind of response that we get. They'll say, "Well, I decided to do it as a kind of act of charity to help out a veteran. And frankly, I was kind of worried about what if I heard things that were going to be upsetting to me." And they say that even those who did hear very upsetting things felt that overwhelmingly the experience of listening had been transformative in the most positive way. And when you ask why, they say, "Because I'm listening to somebody who's from a different world from me. I had some stereotyped ideas about what veterans are like. They're all about violence, they want to kill, they're mentally ill. But when I sat there and listened with my whole heart and with respect, which is what we instruct them to do, they say, there was a connection that formed, and it formed very quickly, because that's what happens. It becomes very deep. We used to call it friendship. We used to call it human connection. That's what happens when you listen. And the listeners will say, I ended up understanding so much about this veteran's humanity. And by listening to what they had experienced in the military and trying to come home, I learned more about my own humanity and about humanity in general. So when the experience is so positive for both the veteran and the listener, that's what makes us want to keep going. And I want to say one more thing, which is that some veterans have chosen to do the listening sessions because they have something they want to talk about that they've never said to anybody before. And often the last people they want to talk to about this sort of thing are the people close to them. Because what if they don't understand? What if they say the wrong thing? Our listeners don't say the wrong thing because all they do is listen. So it's a much safer situation in which the veterans can talk. Other veterans think that they don't have anything they need to talk about, and other veterans need it more. You know, a lot of veterans think that there's nothing much of what they've done, but they think they want to see other veterans helped. But some veterans are choosing to do a listening session with a non-veteran because they see it as a way of continuing their service. They know better than the rest of us how much of this country is military illiterate and war illiterate. And so whether or not they were at war, they will educate the rest of us about what the military that serves in the name of all of us is doing and what it's like to be there. And when we find our common humanity, that's worth everything.